Now, you mentioned there's an untested part of the law. What are the implications if he loses his case?
Well, I think there's certainly some strong issues that will arise out of the case if he loses for the general perspective on religion and whether or not religion still has protection. In some ways, it's going to be a narrow case. It's going to be about was he terminated because of his religious beliefs. But it's being used as the canary in the coal mine for a whole range of other of how our society is going to interact with Christians. So in many ways, it's a very important case. And in some ways, it's going to give us some specific law on a specific set of facts, Israel Folau's facts,
Yep.
in relation to his employment. But look, Israel Folau's general experience is one that is been experienced by all sorts of common, everyday Australians. Their stories don't get heard because they don't have the high public profile, the paycheck, and the social media following of a guy like
Yep.
Israel Folau.
Now, you deal with a lot of those kind of cases. Are you able to share a couple of examples for us about how things are really playing out for Christians in the workplace?
Sure. Look, religious freedom is certainly under attack in a number of different spheres within our Australian society. And it's not just in the workplace. So our law firm, Human Rights Law Alliance, is a not-for-profit law firm. And we represent people who get in trouble just for believing in Jesus Christ and being Christian and living as Christians. So we obviously have lots of cases like Israel Folau's case, which is where religious people, Christian people, get in trouble in their workplace for things that they have done outside of the workplace. And many of the people who we have come talk to us are people who are in regulated professions, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, etc. All of these people have regulatory bodies which administer and give them a license to practice. Now, all of those bodies have disciplinary functions, and these exist below the level of the courts of Australia and oftentimes outside of public scrutiny. And they also usually have the ability for anybody to make a complaint. So if you want to make a complaint about me as a lawyer, which I don't suggest that you do, you can do so by going to my regulatory body, the Law Society of the ACT, and lodging a complaint. And it can be anonymous, and it doesn't have to be in relation to any services that I've provided. And the scary thing is that people are getting hauled before disciplinary authorities simply for orthodox religious beliefs that they have expressed on social media. And look, I've got about 9 or 10 cases of that. Teachers in public schools, doctors, pharmacists, dentists, counsellors, people who provide mental health counselling. That is certainly a real concern, that the Christian voice can be silenced on social media by attacking the person's employment or their license to practice. So as Christians, we are really concerned in those cases to make sure that where there is speech and you don't agree with it, it's met with speech. An idea is met with a counter idea rather than you express an idea, you lose your job, you lose your qualification. The people who I talk to come under a barrage from all sides in these issues. When they phone me up, they've had an absolute difficult time of anxiety, of mental anguish, where someone has trawled through their posts, sometimes up to 10, 20 years of social media posts, and picked out things that they say they find offensive and then attack that person's job. And that's just one category. There's other people who are getting attacked in the workplace just for expressing the fact that they are Christians. So public servants who've come into a meeting room, and the people in that meeting room are talking about Israel Folau and saying, Israel Folau, what an idiot. Israel Folau, can you believe that that guy wasn't hung, drawn and quartered rather than just terminated? Someone says, look, to be honest, I find it offensive that you talk like that because I support Israel Folau. Hardly the worst statement to make, and yet leads to complaints to HR about the fact that the mere support of Israel Folau has made them feel unsafe, feels like it's a direct attack on them, results in meetings with the boss, in performance management being put in place. Now, to be clear, this is not the kind of persecution that people in other parts of the world experience by any means, and by any stretch of the imagination, but it is real for the people who experience this. And I've had people who are on the phone with me, and just the fact that I acknowledge that what they've said is quite benign, that it really is just an expression of ordinary Christian belief, fills them with such an enormous sense of relief that they're profusely thanking me just for being a listening ear. Unless you're in the situation in that pressure cooker, you can't really understand what it is like for these people. And I have plenty of examples, 10, 12 examples of people who have been in their workplace. I have a TAFE lecturer who, when someone would blaspheme or use the name of God in vain, he would say, "Oh, do you know Jesus? Because I know him, he's my saviour." This was overheard by an HR representative who then gave him a letter telling him he is not allowed to speak about religion at all in his workplace, and that he could be subject to discipline or to a psychiatric assessment because of what was a pretty benign comment and a very non-controversial way to engage with blasphemy that's offensive to many Christians. Plenty of examples of this in Australia right now.
Yep. Good.
Dave, can I offer a few more?
Sure, please.
So, John's, if you go to HRLA's John's website, you'll find some lists of cases, and he's put them out. And then if you go to our website, the Institute for Civil Society, i4cs.com.au, that's I and then the number 4cs.com.au, you find this paper on policy and drafting issues in a religious discrimination bill. There are 21 documented examples of discrimination against religious people or organisations, Australian examples, and then another 13 international examples. So if you want some evidence this is real, you can go and get the sourced examples there. Let me just quote a couple to you. Some of these are John's cases. So, Perth wedding photographer who said to a gay couple who asked for him to take photos of them, he said, "Well, I'm happy to do that, but you should know that I'm a Christian. So if that causes you, and I don't, I'm not in favour of gay marriage or gay couples, but I will do a professional job for you, but I'm just going to tell you that just in case you'd prefer to go and get someone else." They took offence at that. They took him to the Anti-Discrimination Commission in Western Australia. It accepted the case. They had unsatisfactory or not non-conclusive conciliation attempts, and then he was taken to the State Administrative Tribunal. Now, he didn't even refuse them service. He didn't say, "I'm not going to photograph you." He just said, "In case you would be more comfortable with someone who was on the same page as you, I should just tell you about my beliefs, but I will do a professional job for you."
And in those cases, the punishment is the process. This unfolds over 6 to 8 months. Mm-hmm. The person's completely stressed while this is going on. The good thing is they become very expert very quickly on the law as relates to discrimination. And many of them find at the end of it that it's been a great experience in strengthening their faith, because that's what trials do.
They've prayed a lot.
But we don't actively go out looking for trials, and the punishment is that process. Yep. Having to go through every single step of it is stressful.
A uni student in, I won't say the state, a Christian, told a classmate who spoke to him regarding their struggles with anxiety, offered to pray for them, which he did. They later asked him what they thought about, what he thought, what would you do if your friend was gay? And he said, "Look, I would show love to them, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with what they were doing." That was reported up, and he was suspended. Now, he eventually was reinstated with some help from HRLA, but that's a uni student who's just made a pretty innocent comment. You heard about that during the same-sex marriage plebiscite. The 18-year-old woman in Canberra who worked for Capital Parties wrote, "It's okay to vote no" on her Facebook page. Sacked. And called a bigot, which is great irony by the person who sacked her. We had Ryan, a general manager of a digital services company in Victoria, whose company was doing work for the Safe Schools program in Victoria. And when he let some of his staff go off early to a pro-safe schools rally, and they said, "Are you coming?" He said, "No, I'm not going to come." I said, "I respect your right to go and do it, but it's not in accordance with my values, so I'm not going to go." That was reported to the people who ran the business. He was sacked. So it happens. This sort of discrimination, calling out, happens. It happens in our schools. It happens in workplaces. I spoke recently at a Catholic Lawyers Association breakfast, and they asked me to come because they said a lot of their members were feeling under pressure when it came up to Pride Day, when they were working in the Victorian government or for agencies working for the Victorian government, and they had to wear purple. And they said, "We're feeling a lot of pressure," because people come around and say, "No purple. What's going on? Where's the purple?" And I think John's also had a case with a Canberra public servant who got into trouble. He was threatened with disciplinary proceedings because he said, "I don't want to receive these emails about pride marches," in his workplace. So and then these issues have real consequences. One last story. In Britain, it's like an Israel Folau story, but no one of the prominence of Israel Folau. A guy who had worked at a housing trust, which is a private corporation that provides housing stock for people. He'd worked there for about 30 years. He was on Facebook. The Home Secretary, one of the ministers in the government, had just made an announcement saying, "Look, it's probably time the churches got on board and they should have same-sex marriage ceremonies in the church properties," because at that stage that wasn't allowed. But the Home Secretary saying churches need to move with the times and have same-sex marriage ceremonies on church property. And he just responded, after he said, "Wolverhampton, this year's looking good. I'm having meatballs for dinner." In the middle of all of that, he said, "That seems a bit far. I don't think churches should be forced to host same-sex wedding ceremonies." He was pulled up for disciplinary proceedings because one of his colleagues saw that. He was reported. He was brought up for disciplinary proceedings. He didn't even oppose same-sex marriage. He just said that he thought it was a bit rough that churches should be forced to host them. He was going to be sacked, but they said in light of his 30 years of service, that would be too harsh. So they just demoted him to sub-managerial position, and he lost 40% of his salary. He then sued, and 3 years later he recovered £100 in damages. £100 in damages. That is a real case. There are real cases like that around the Western world, and there'll be real cases like that in Australia as well. So this is a real problem we're talking about. And that is one of the things, those problems are one of the things that the federal religious discrimination bill is meant to try to handle.
Mm-hmm. And probably the last category, I don't know, is everyone sick of examples and wants to move on?
No, that's fine.
I think examples are powerful.
Yeah.
A young couple in Western Australia, deeply committed Christians, who felt it on their heart that they wanted to be involved in fostering children because there's an incredible need for foster parents in the system. They're crying out for people to take in these children. There are more and more children coming from broken homes. So they talked to some friends who were fostering and made an application to a fostering agency to become foster parents on a temporary basis for children between the ages of 0 and 5 because their own children were quite young. Now, they went through the preliminary assessment and they passed with flying colours. This was a wonderful young couple, a stable relationship. He's just your everyday tradesman. She's a stay-at-home mum with her kids. They got to the secondary stage of assessment, and it came out that there was some concern expressed by the social workers that they might have views on LGBTQ issues that were not acceptable. So they were given some worksheets, and the worksheets were said, what would you do if your 13-year-old foster child came home and had been caught at school kissing someone of the same sex? When they answered that, they said, well, we're Christians. We believe that homosexuality is a sin. Now, if we were being asked to have that child placed with us, we would not prefer that placement. This is standard in foster care, that you match people to appropriate carers. However, if it was someone who had been placed with us long term, we would continue to have them in our home. We would not kick them out. We would continue to show them love, but we couldn't endorse their lifestyle choices in relation to homosexuality. Now that is a fairly orthodox Christian position that's been held for millennia within the church. But on that basis, the fostering agency dropped them like a hot potato. They said, sorry, we're not going to proceed with your application. You cannot continue on with this application process. When pushed about it, they said the basis that we're denying you to become foster parents is that we think you are unsafe as foster parents. You do not provide a safe space for potential foster children. Despite the fact that they were only ever applying to be temporary carers for children between the ages of 0 and 5, where LGBTQI issues just couldn't possibly really arise in a meaningful way. The mere fact that they held to Orthodox Christian beliefs means that they are excluded from actively fostering children. Now, this has had a really dampening effect within their wider Christian community, because Christian communities talk and they know about these things with people who want to become foster carers. And that's a tragedy, because there's a huge amount of Christians who would be wonderful foster parents. So we're currently running a claim through WA of religious discrimination on behalf of this couple.
Yep, great.